we we live in a society and a growingly unequal society at that as well. According to the U.S. to the Congressional Budget Office, wealth and income inequality has grown greatly since 1989, with the top 10% controlling over 76% of all family wealth, and the top 1% controlling nearly 40% of all family wealth. Yet, according to to a report done by the Special Rapporteur of the United Nations, over 40 million people in the United States live in poverty, and over 18.5 million live in extreme poverty, and about 5.3 million live in third world country conditions. What's one what is one potential solution? What can we do about this? Well, one potential solution to cushion the impacts of poverty is universal basic income, which in the basic definition is a free sum of cash given to all people regardless of income or employment status. The point of the speech is to explain why I personally believe that universal basic income is a good thing, and to examine the economic evidences and arguments for universal basic income. I'll explain. I'll start off by explaining how universal basic income can be funded, how it can, what the benefits of universal basic income can be, address its counter arguments, but also address its limitations and how it can be applied most effectively as well. To start off with, universal basic income can be funded by redistributing wealth from the highest earners through taxation to the lowest earners. The average cost of living in the United States is about $1,000 per month, according to the website TransferWise. I think this would be a good amount of cash to transfer. Now it's true that this may lead to some forms of increased taxation, even on the middle class. But it's also important to remember that because the money earned from universal basic income pays for all or almost all of the cost of living for the average American, that as a result the average American winds up spending less of their original job paycheck than they otherwise would have. And in terms of other benefits for universal basic income, obviously one is that no one is unable to put food on the table, but also we reduce income and wealth inequality, which are both leeches on our economy. For example, when you have so much wealth concentrated on so few people, so much of it winds up never getting invested because there is a limit to how much any person will wind up spending. If you then redistribute that excess amount of wealth to the lower to those who have more needs, but have less spending power, who then go on to spend it, you wind up increasing consumer spending and therefore increasing economic growth. In an interesting study I read by the International Monetary Fund, associated longer periods of sustained economic growth with greater income equality. In fact, in the very same study, they suggested that closing the income gap by just 50% in Latin America and emerging Asia would more than double the average periods of growth of economic growth spells. And of course, in terms of other reasons why wealth and income inequality is so economically devastating, there is also the Great Gatsby curve, first proposed by chairman of the Council of Economic Advisors, Alan Krugman, which associates which associates countries with greater income and wealth inequality with lower intergenerational social mobility, which is defined as the ability for a person to move between social classes within their own lifetime. So in other words, the more unequal our economy is, the more difficult it is for people to escape from poverty. And one of the best ways to to expand to decrease income and wealth inequality is through redistribution of wealth. Now, one of the biggest counter arguments to universal basic income and other forms of social safety nets is that they make people lazy and that they incentivize people to drop out of the workforce. I don't believe this is. I don't believe this is correct. But because, for example, there was a study done called the Oregon Health Insurance Experiment, which where they found that Medicaid had little or no impact on employment or working hours, and according to the Roosevelt Institute, who analyzed the findings of several different studies of unconditional cash transfer, found open quote that the evidence does not suggest that a worker will drop out of the workforce after receiving unconditional cash, even if the amount transferred is large. And people do not just drink away their income. And universal basic income is a benefit like Medicare and Medicaid to provide greater economic security and to protect people from the impacts of economic crashes. Because as we can see, there are so many people who have been forced out of the workforce force for no fault of their own, and there's due to factors that they had no control over. And I think one of the greatest privilege opportunities for those of us who have so much is to be able to give to those who have so little without any with the of no fault of their own. Now, of course, in regards to the limitations of universal basic income must also be addressed as well. I am not in any way proposing, for example, that we replace the social safety nets with universal basic income, as some, for example, former U.S. President Richard Nixon have suggested. This is because giving $1,000 to everybody is based on the average cost of living. In other words, it's a policy that tailored to the average American, and there are several Americans who clearly have it much worse than the average American. Which is why I believe that and programs like Medicare and Medicaid have are of great help to those who do have it much worse. Which is why I believe that it's so important that they are maintained. And I know from personal experience, even as someone who has thankfully never lived in poverty, it can be incredibly difficult, even for people with a whole number of qualifications. Like my dad, who has an MBA, for example. We've really struggled to pay for something as simple as health insurance. And I know for a fact that there are people in much even worse positions than we ever were, which is why I think it's so important that those programs be maintained to help those who are less fortunate. And of course, and also of course, the biggest limitation though is that the benefits of universal basic income to increase social mobility and to also reduce inequalities in the economy will be short term if we don't take into account structural inequalities as well. For example, breaking up the large companies before they become monopolies, because is a market truly free if there is unfair competition, as well as also strengthening the unions and regulating the banks so that they don't constantly loan out subprime loans, and also making sure that we invest in our economy as well by constantly investing in education, infrastructure, and the environment, particularly the environment, as there will be in the coming years, more and more demand for greener forms of technology and renewable sources of energy. In conclusion, in summary, universal basic income can be funded through progressive taxation. Does not make people lazy, and when coupled with combat towards structural inequalities as well, could contribute to a much more fair societies. I have proposed universal basic income as not the solution to poverty, but part of a solution to create in the world in the words of Paul Krugman, a world where we would be happy, that we would want if we did not have in advance have any control over who we would be. And I think that everyone has a right to a basic standard of living, and I believe that. And though, like I've said, the war on poverty is a very complicated war, but I think that guaranteed income and ensuring that everyone can pay for basic needs puts us all in a much better position. Uh, well, thanks for sitting through that. Let's just end that there.